Hagel most recently criticized the Obama administration on Syria. He said the strategy there needed to include the Syrian government as well. He also testified before Congress recently on, perhaps we need ground troops to fight ISIS. Don't know if any of this has to do with Hagel stepping down. We just got this word from the New York Times. Again, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel stepping down as Defense Secretary. As you know, he just took office in 2013. We have General Mark Hurtling right now on our beeper line. General, are you there?
I am here.
General, are you there?
I'm here, Carol. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. I'm just kind of stunned by this news that Chuck Hagel is stepping down. How about you?
Well, it actually does stun me a little bit, too. It's surprising given some of the things that are going on with both Afghanistan, in ISIL, with our forces in Africa maintaining the fight against Ebola, several other factors all around the world. This is a very critical time, and I can't account for why he would be doing this now.
You know, he had a great friendship with President Obama, and then he came out to criticize the president's strategy in fighting ISIS. Could that be a reason? I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure I would categorize it as criticizing the strategy. I think the national security team are all constantly trying to adjust the strategy based on changing conditions. And he has certainly been vocal in making known to the president how he feels, which is, I think, something that a very good Secretary of Defense would do in any kind of crisis situation. I don't think that's part of it. There may be differences of opinion that none of us know about, but that's just conjecture, I think, on any of our parts right now.
I'm just reading the New York Times article while you're talking, and of course the New York Times broke this news. It says that one reason Hagel might be stepping down is a recognition that the threat from the Islamic State will require a different kind of skills than those that Mr. Hagel was brought on to employ. What does that mean in your mind?
Well, I think Mr. Hagel was certainly recruited to be the Secretary of Defense under some assumptions that we would be leading both Iraq and Afghanistan, that budget conditions would be very different, in fact, would be less, that sequestration was taking place over the next 2 years and would critically affect the budgets of the services. And I think quite the opposite has all occurred within the last couple of months in terms of, well, ISIL, for one, the fight against Ebola for two, Russian expansionism in Europe. So all of these things are requiring perhaps a different approach to the budgetary conditions, to what he was asked to do in the Department of Defense following on his predecessor, what both he and General Dempsey are being asked to do, and they're in competition with the facts on the ground right now, what's going on all over the world.
General, stay with me. I want to head to Vienna and check in with our CNN Chief National Security Correspondent Jim Sciutto, because the news has reached Vienna. What are you hearing, Jim?
Carol, I can report this now. I can confirm this report, citing a senior defense official, that Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, will be leaving office. I'm told by this official that this was a mutual decision in consultation between Secretary Hagel and the President. I'm also told that Secretary Hagel will remain in his position until another nominee is in place. But again, just repeating that news, we can confirm, citing a senior defense official, Secretary Chuck Hagel will be leaving his post as Defense Secretary. It's described to me as a mutual decision, and I'm told that he will remain in place until a nominee to replace him is able to step in.
Jim, you've been around a long time. You've been reporting a lot about things like this. Hagel was only appointed in 2013. That's a quick tenure.
It is a quick tenure, and I'll tell you, questions like this had come up a couple of weeks ago, and I speak to a lot of people in the Pentagon, and at that time they were very firm in saying this was not in the cards, this was not going to happen. So either something changed during that time frame, or that there were incomplete discussions that had started sometime before. Regardless, it is a shock, I will tell you. It's a shock to a lot of the people I speak to regularly, not only in the Pentagon, but in defense quarters. And keep in mind, this is happening when the Pentagon is a very busy building right now, as you know. There is a growing war on ISIS. There are continuing commitments, military commitments in places such as Yemen, a continuing commitment just described recently as expanding in Afghanistan beyond the expected withdrawal of U.S. troops there, as well as military challenges elsewhere. You have hundreds of U.S. troops deployed to Africa now in the Ebola response. You have a military challenge from China in the Pacific that is ongoing and becoming more severe by many accounts. So this is arguably one of the busiest people in the administration, and to step down now, this is an extremely significant decision.
All right, I want to head to the Pentagon now and check in with Barbara Starr. A couple of things to keep in mind. Chuck Hagel is the sole Republican in the president's cabinet, right? He was a great friend of Mr. Obama. He was approved by Congress, something not easy, in part because he is a Republican. So you have to wonder what happens now.
Well, they will have to look for someone to replace him, and with only a couple of years left in this administration, that may be very tough. I have to tell you, Carol, I've just spoken to someone very close to Hagel who tells me that these discussions with the president, between President Obama and the Secretary of Defense, had been going on for several weeks. They had been talking about what the president wanted to see in the last couple of years of his administration in terms of national security. And over the last several weeks, they talked about all of this. Secretary Hagel then submitting his resignation this morning, and the president accepting it this morning. Now, you know, pushed or jumped is always the question, and could be partly both. Over the last several weeks, the undercurrent of chatter about what was going on about the National Security Council staff being unhappy with various cabinet secretaries letting it be known that they thought the NSC was micromanaging them, you know, both sides going back and forth. You see a lot of this sniping, if you will, all the time in Washington, but it certainly had reached crescendo levels. So, you know, was Hagel pushed out by an NSC that found his job performance lacking, or did he decide that he couldn't really continue on and be effective? Hard to say at this point, and at this point we don't really know the answer. I'll tell you, I saw Secretary Hagel and interviewed him last Saturday in California. There certainly were no hints of this. He was very publicly, very forward-looking, had a number of initiatives on his plate, a number of things that he said he wanted to do. He was very upbeat. But there has been this undercurrent, and I think it doesn't affect just Secretary Hagel. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, also very much out there offering his opinions on the war on ISIS, and some of it not being on the same page as the White House about the notion of putting a small number of troops on the ground. What this really goes to, again, is seeing this undercurrent of political sniping between the Pentagon, the military, the civilian leadership, and the White House. But I think it is very much worth saying Chuck Hagel was absolutely welcomed by the enlisted ranks in the military. He made a lot of very deep connections with the enlisted people. They saw him as a Vietnam veteran. They saw him as someone who walked the walk with them. This is a man who'd been in very heavy combat in Vietnam, had been wounded, Purple Heart, shrapnel in his chest. This is a guy who knows what it takes to be out there, and the enlisted people had always appreciated that, had always enlisted people I've spoken to had always commented on that Hagel had been very different than any other defense secretary that they had seen. But now, you know, he will stay until a new nominee is confirmed, and the president will have to look for someone who can be confirmed by a Republican Senate, very focused on ISIS, very focused on moving ahead. And the chairman of the new Senate Armed Services Committee, John McCain, the Republican from Arizona, who will have to lead the confirmation through the Senate of a new nominee, is very hawkish on wanting to see more troops in action in Syria and Iraq. Carol?
All right, Barbara, thank you. I want to head to the White House now and check in with Athena Jones. Any word coming from the White House as to why Chuck Hagel is stepping down?
Good morning, Carol. Well, we have, as you said, confirmed that Chuck Hagel is stepping down. We expect to get an announcement later today from the president on this, but we're just getting more information in from a senior administration here at the White House who says that over the past 2 years, Secretary Hagel helped manage an intense period of transition for the United States Armed Forces, including the drawdown in Afghanistan, the need to prepare our forces for future missions, and tough fiscal choices to keep our military strong and ready. Bear with me, we're just getting this in. Over nearly 2 years, Secretary Hagel has been a steady hand guiding our military through this transition and helping us to respond to challenges from ISIL or ISIS to Ebola. In October, Secretary Hagel began speaking with the president about departing the administration given the natural post-midterm transitions time. Those conversations have been ongoing for several weeks. This morning at 11 a.m., at the White House, joined by the president, Secretary Hagel will announce his resignation. So that's what we're just getting now. Just a couple of hours from now, we're going to be hearing from the president and from Secretary Hagel to make this announcement official. A successor will be named in short order, but they say that Secretary Hagel will remain as defense secretary until his replacement is confirmed by the United States Senate. And Carol, I know you remember what we've heard from Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. He said that in response to this executive action on immigration, that the Senate should hold off on confirming new nominations. Now, certainly we would not think that national security would be involved in this, but certainly there could be a big nomination fight ahead when it comes to figuring out who's going to be replacing Secretary Hagel. Carol?
And that is the immediate problem, right? Athena Jones, thanks so much. I want to